Hello and welcome to the Film Ireland podcast. I'm Gemma Creagh and I'm chatting with director Luke McManus about his documentary North Circular, but as he's walking through the North Circular. So thank you so much for chatting with us.
No, my pleasure. Thanks for asking me.
You are on the North Circular Road as we speak.
Literally dragging a wheelie case behind me up towards Dorset Street right now. And then I'll be going past Mountjoy, Dalymount, and then down to me gaff, which is near Grange Gormouth.
Fabulous. And very, very true to the subject matter. So you...
Totally.
Like, first off, it's a gorgeous, gorgeous documentary. As a North Sider myself, I enjoy watching. I think you forget how steeped in history our part of the world is, how around every corner there's been like generations and generations of people existing, of music and art and life. And I think your documentary does a beautiful job of celebrating that in all its kind of nuanced form.
Oh, thank you very much. It's funny. I always fancied making a History of Dublin documentary. But I never got around to it. And I didn't kind of realize that this was it until I was sort of halfway through it, you know? So, walking around the city is a bit like flipping it through the pages of a book, you know? It's sort of, you can read a city as you walk. You can kind of, it's legible to you. It's a strange thing, this particular road, because it sort of has everything on it, you know? All of human life and all its misery and triumph, you know?
You have modern day tenements, you have kind of soulless glass box buildings, you have gorgeous, rich little those like little 1930s cottages, those red brick ones that are so familiar in the Batter. You have whole class of Dubliner.
Very much so. I mean, that was kind of the way that was kind of something I was always been very interested in, people's class backgrounds. And I grew up in Bray, which is a place with an amazing mixture of social classes, from Supreme Court judges to, you know, people, you know, who are really sort of impoverished and, you know, living in very deprived conditions. And we all kind of were Bray people together, you know, which always something I loved about where I grew up. And then when I came to live here, I realized, you know, the same was true, and maybe even more so. Like, you had President Higgins kind of lives in the North Circular Road. You know, I've taken a sort of slightly broader definition of it to include the park. So that was my kind of conceit, that you've everyone from Ulster on the Heron to the kind of Roma immigrants and the, you know, the kind of the young boys of Summerhill, you know, and everyone in between.
And you capture like the kind of the vibrancy of it, the life, the multiculturalism, like it's very and do it in this beautiful layered, textured way. Can you tell me a little bit about, so this is a real art documentary. Can you tell me a little bit about what it started like as an idea in your head, how you worked it into a pitch, and then how it took off?
Sure. Well, I'm never quite sure where it all began. I do remember thinking a long time ago that there was something very interesting about the North Circular Road. And I was a big fan of, in the 90s, there was these people in London in the early 90s, and they called it psychogeography, which isn't a particularly lovely term. But what they were about was kind of walking the streets of London and sort of unpicking the narratives that they sort of perceived along them. And there was Ian Sinclair and Peter Ackroyd and Will Self, and a bunch of them doing it. And I also thought that'd be an amazing way to navigate in a film through Dublin. And the North Circular seemed to be the obvious place, given the prisons and the hospitals and the stadiums and the mental hospitals and the, you know, barracks and all these crazy institutions that were along it. But it kind of sat in a drawer, as films do. And I actually remember Donald Nugent, who I think I was in college with, brought out a film called North Circular Road in 2015. And I was like, oh no, Bollocks, he's done it. And I looked at the trailer and I was like, oh no, it's like a psychological thriller. It's a totally different type of film. It's not at all what I was thinking of. So I was like, ooh. But then I was like, geez, I better do it sometime. And then, of course, it didn't happen for ages. And then I did a film with Lancome, who were called Lynch back then. for the title track of their album, Cold Old Fire. And they that was in black and white 4:3, and it had Shanno singing in it, and it had a kind of moody look on history. And I shot it in a big house in Smithfield that was kind of like a perfect 18th century house in Smithfield. So, so that kind of aesthetic then was rattling around in my head because I kind of loved that film, that music video,
Yeah.
and other people loved it, and it was like one of these things where I just felt, I really expressed myself really well there, and I had amazing collaborators. So then I kind of just took the idea of the North Circular and the aesthetic of Cold Old Fire and put them together. And that's kind of how the real art thing came about. So the mixture of music and storytelling that you find in the film.
And so you were producer along with Elaine Gallagher.
Yeah.
And you guys put together then a pitch. Like what kind of documentation do the Arts Council need for real art? Do you have to put your every single type of character that you were looking to speak with, or do you put a tone or a vibe? Like how do you kind of encapsulate a film like this at that stage?
It's funny. It's funny because Elaine kind of hopped on the project quite a bit later on after it had been funded. So it was kind of just me doing it. And I looked back at the proposal the other day, and it actually it's a lot closer to the finished film than I thought it would be. It's like surprisingly accurate to the vision that I had. I mean, there's obviously lots of differences to it, and that's the beauty of documentary is, you come up with a plan and then you're hoping reality has a better plan for you, and that events happen that are interesting, But yeah, I put together a proposal that was pretty detailed about content and about structure, pretty detailed about the aesthetic approach. Like I've written, I'm getting on. I've written a lot of these things at this stage, so you get good at it after a while. They're a nightmare when you're starting out. They're just really overwhelming. And I always feel sorry for young filmmakers trying to write proposals because it is really hard to get it down on paper in a way that you're satisfied with. But it's funny, over the last few years, I found it much easier just because I've done so many of them.
And what advice would you give someone, actually? That's a very good point. Like, I'm sure there's plenty of people listening there that have their hair torn out, pondering over those application forms. What would be your sort of tip for capturing the mood of a piece?
Well, I suppose the first thing I would say is something very fundamental about pitching, which is a weird twin kind of. You have two agendas. One is to excite and interest and intrigue, and the second agenda is to reassure. So basically, those two things are sort of slightly in conflict with one another. Because what you need to do is excite the person at the other end that you can come up with something really interesting and fun and amazing that's going to be worth watching. But you have to reassure them that it's you're actually capable of delivering it in that budget and in that time frame, So it's quite an interesting balance you need to strike. I think you need to write something that feels like the experience of watching the film, and I think you can't really go too far wrong with that. So you just drop them in and go, we are in the Phoenix Park. We're about to go on a journey down to Dublin Port, and on the way we're going to meet a lot of people, and we're going to travel to a lot of interesting places and hear some amazing music, and sort of, don't be overcomplicated. I mean, it also depends who your audience is in terms of commissioners. I think that's a big thing. I mean, if you're talking about tone and aesthetic and all that, you just have to put in photographs, and that's really important, I think, to include imagery so that at a glance they can see what world you're trying to create.
Yeah.
Another thing that was quite lucky, I think, was that it was the era of the Zoom pitch, which is, it was COVID times when I was pitching. So I was kind of in my kitchen with a tea in front of me, fluffy socks on, so I hadn't had that whole stressy thing of getting to a room and waiting and, someone else being in before you and someone else going in after you, that whole weird energy, audition type energy. So I was kind of in a very comfortable place, and I was able to do a little keynote presentation that I shared into the Zoom meeting. That was very simple, but it just was a visual. So that came. So it was a two-stage process for real art. You do your submission of proposal, director's notes, collaborators' CVs, letters of interest from the people you're going to work with, and the budget, and then you get shortlisted. And then it was like a Zoom pitch, a sort of half-hour, 20-minute Zoom pitch, and I decided to make the most of Zoom's technologies and advantages. So it's actually a great format to do presentations in.
Yeah, but I suppose you're definitely one of the more technologically advanced people. I'd say to people that can that are applying for these things, like barely work a Zoom because they're
I
tricky.
don't know about that.
I don't know.
Filmmaking is quite technical. You know, you have to be a bit of an engineer if you're going to be a filmmaker. You know, in my mind, like if you're not, you're deluding yourself. You know, so and like if I'm going to be a big fat nerd, I might as well try and bend it to my advantage, you know, and make the most of it. But you are right. I am a real kind of Mac jockey, and I doing little graphics in Photoshop. And another thing I did that was quite cool was I got some of the collaborators to record little videos on their phones. So probably shouldn't be giving away my trade secrets, but anyway, here we are.
Like everyone be taking notes.
Yeah, but I had them in the keynote, so you click through and I go, and here's the editor I'm going to work with, and then you'd have 1 minute of John Murphy telling you why he loved the project, you know.
So you've kind of like a kind of a bunch of professionals backing you before you've even gone into the room, kind of having your.
I think that's key. I think like if you've been in the industry for a while and you've built up some previous collaborators that you've had really good experiences with, you kind of have to go there to them and go, I really want you on this, and I want you on this from proposal stage. Are you into it? Will you commit to it? You know?
Yeah.
Because it just makes it a lot more. That works to reassure the funder, you know. Like if they're looking at it going, okay, he's got John Murphy cutting it, he's got Paddy Jordan shooting it, and he's got Lankham and Gemma Dunleavy both agreeing to be in it and collaborate with him. How far wrong can we go? Even if McManus is a total clown, it'll probably still be good, you know.
And tell me then about, so you got the funding, you got your interview, Elaine came on board. What was the stages then? How do you go out and find your subject matter? Do you record the music first? Do you go out into the street and find your neighbors? Like what?
I had a few techniques because it was lockdown. All you could actually do is just walk around the place anyway. So I was kind of going out for my little 2K walk, and I was like on a recce basically every day in my head. So that was the first thing. And then I kind of said to Paddy, January came around and said, let's go out and shoot on like New Year's Day or 2nd of January, first thing in the morning when it's still dark. And, you know, just started shooting in a kind of photo walk safari type way. Just let's go to Fibser and see what imagery we can come back with, you know?
And it's great if you're a familiar face as well. People will tend to trust you more. Like the fact that you're in the community,
totally.
That you're part of the community, that you're there with them, like that makes a big difference. Like sure, I always think of you as a figure around town. You're always at the protests filming. I don't see you there.
Yeah, well, I did a series about protests, so I think that was probably the reason that you saw me in lots of them, because I did a TV3 series about street protests. But yeah, it's an interesting point. Like I am more than 20 years in Dublin 7. I'm, you know, like
blowing,
and I am kind of. I'm not though. This is the thing. Here's a beautiful thing for you. Let me tell you, I am totally a blow-in Bray Ovs. Like even if you're there 25 years, you're still a blow-in. But I started making the film, and I was talking to my aunt in England, and you know the way every family has the one auntie who like knows everything about the family tree, you know, just is the guardian of that stuff, you know. And she's like, "Well, you know, you're from there," and I was like, "What?" And she goes, "Your grandmother Emily McKeown, she grew up in the North Circular in the little flat and all that." And I went looking for it. It's literally around the corner. Whoop, they're beeping their horns here now. It's literally around the corner from where I live, you know. The flat that my grandmother grew up in, and she married my grandfather in Stoneybarter in Occam Street Church, but they moved to the south side and the connection was broken. Like my great grandfather was a cattle dealer in the market at Hanlon's Corner, the famous cattle market there. So, like, it turns out I am from here, and like, it's so weird that I ended up living in a house around the corner from where my grandmother was born. it's kind of extraordinary, and I'm sure it is a coincidence, but at the same time, it's a big coincidence, isn't it?
And you can't help but that feeling of, I don't know, like almost like ghosts, I think, in some parts of Dublin. Like you can
Yeah, for
feel
sure.
the history. Like I know it sounds a bit mad, like, but I don't know, there's sometimes if you're just going by and you just get that sense like so much has happened here.
No, totally, totally. You peel back the layers like an onion and you reveal things underneath. And I actually was thinking about those at one stage. The film was going to be called "Ghosts of the North Circular Road," but uh, but I'm glad it was just too long. And then Alan Gilston's film's called "Ghosts of Bagatonia," which is about Bagot Street. So it's like, right, thank God I didn't do that. Like, but that idea of a ghost, I'd spent a lot of time thinking about that, because the one thing notice about ghosts is they always inhabit the same spot. It's like, you don't get itinerant ghosts who kind of pop up here and there. They're like in a place always, aren't they? They're like in the haunted house.
Yeah.
And I think that's because culturally what a ghost is a story that we tell about the resonances of history in a building, and about the strange sense that we pick up when we go into a place that might have seen terrible things or might have had tragic moments in it, the past.
Intergenerational trauma. Like, I mean, there's been,
Yes,
like, I
yes,
mean, we
yes.
were a third world country up until like relatively recently in our history, and all the kind of glass box fabulous hotels popping up around the city like can actually mask like that people were like living on nothing, and your community protected you. And
You're 100% right. Like, and it's so interesting you should say that, because my grandmother married a man who was a very middle class sort of small businessman who did grand for himself and was able to provide a comfortable life for her. But she grew up in extreme poverty. The father lost all the money. The mother died. The brother died. Three of her brothers died. They were living on porridge. I mean, it was real hard time stuff. And it's funny, I always remember my grandmother as a sad lady. She had a lot to be happy about, but she was just not someone who, I think she was damaged and scarred by all the terrible things she'd seen in her childhood.
yeah,
And it kind of, so in a weird way, the film's a bit of a journey into my own head, kind of like, a lot of the themes in the film connect into my own personal ancestry. And, it's definitely a very personal film. Wow, it's all happening in Fibsborough.
are we gonna get you killed? Like,
Some lunatic just took a right turn where you're not allowed, and a bus nearly ran him down. I'm on Doyle's Corner now, which used to be called Dunphy's Corner. And at one stage, I was going to get Lancome to sing a song called Sergeant William Bailey, from their second album, which is about a man who used to stand on the corner I'm standing on now, Dunphy's Corner. He was a recruiting sergeant for the British Army.
God. And sure, isn't there Arthur Conan Doyle was supposed to have held a séance in Doyle's court and Doyle's pub.
I'm not sure about that now. That sounds like
A lie.
a tall yet interesting tale.
Yeah. Oh no, I'm sure it was done like to sell cocktails or something. Like if you go in there,
Right.
there's cocktails called like, I don't know, the Sherlock or something like that. But it's
Fantastic. I love it. Yeah, and something, those stories that are just not true, but are still interesting and evocative, I've kind of got a bit of a soft spot for them. I kind of feel like I need to come up with a word for them. I think fake news is a bit too pejorative for them, but they're kind of tall tales. I mean, there's a classic one. Oh, here's a fire engine now. Whoa!
wow.
My God.
But you'll have like a live radio documentary by the time we're finished.
It's great. I'm getting past Doyle's Corner. Hopefully it'll calm down a bit. But yeah, I mean, there's a classic one that people, the Wellington Testimonial, which most people know as the Wellington Monument, but it's actually a testimonial. A monument is built to someone who's dead, and a testimonial is built to someone who's still living. Like a footballer's testimonial football match is like a tribute to them while they're still alive. So the Wellington Testimonial, every taxi driver in Dublin will tell you that the statues on it are made from the melted cannons from the fields of Waterloo that they brought back and then melted down. Which, when you think about it, is obviously not true. Like, it just isn't. So impractical. Like, yeah, they're going to bring back that cannon all the way to Dublin, and the sculpt is going to be, yeah, that's the perfect metal I need, absolutely perfect, and whatever. It's obviously not true, but it's kind of an amazing story nonetheless. Because it says so much about the object and the place. So those little bits of folklore, I'm kind of fond of them.
And there is no such thing as truth in some ways. Like everything is a memory, and memories are always distorted. So I'm like, like if enough people sort of believe it, if it holds truth for the holder of the story, I'm like, good for them, as long as it's not like hurting anyone.
That is a very perceptive and interesting point, and it's a good insight, and it's something that I find as a documentary maker constantly. I'm making a film about homeless people at the moment. Well, a TV series, 3-part TV series for Virgin Media, and a lot of homeless people actually have a very well developed sense of narrative, generally speaking, because it's kind of one of the survival, tools to get by if you're homeless.
Wow.
But it's always a narrative that is sort of here. Can you hear the bells?
Yeah.
So I'm standing under St. Peter's Church now.
Soundscape of the city. That's fabulous.
Yeah, that's in the film too. St. Peter's in Phibsborough is a remarkably gothic and kind of folk horror type church with like gargoyles, and there's like skulls and crossbones on it and whips and all sorts of demented, dark, evil stuff, sinister religion. But yeah, so you were saying about fake news. It's very important, I think, to go when you're making a documentary. I am not going to find the absolute truth here. What I have to do is represent the truths of these people and what's true for them, and give them a chance to express that. And as you say, as long as it's not damaging or insightful or particularly or very dangerous, let people articulate their truth and their story.
Yeah, because it is true for them, but like you'll have two people who've lived through the same thing not even that long ago, and the memory will be completely different. Like if you've ever had that person, like someone retelling you a story of something that happened, like it's just like they're chalk and cheese, or people telling you stories about their parents.
It's so true. It's so true. And like some people tell a story in a kind of long-winded way with loads of unnecessary detail in it. That's really kind of saps the energy out of it. And then some people can't help just making stuff up to make it more interesting, and if they just go too far, they just undermine the credibility of it. So you're trying to find a line between realism and fantasy that's compelling. And I guess that's what I was doing with the film as well, to an extent, was to go, okay, I want it to be a realistic documentary about a real place, but I don't want it to be a kind of flat, boring, kind of uncreative look at it. I want it to have a heightened tone and an atmosphere that's very powerful.
It captures that, but you also really captured the kind of diction, the language of the locals, and I think that's the thing. Like I could hear the lived history. I could hear like the 3 generations of living parents through, like through whoever was the speaker. You could really get that sense. Like and I think it's so important to capture that, because it's being lost. Like communities as we know them, I think, are changing.
They are changing. I mean, I think there's always a risk when you're a filmmaker or a journalist or any kind of a creative person to go on a kind of, oh, everything's terrible, we're losing everything, and Dublin is being destroyed, and like,
we are losing everything.
No, but we aren't. I have to contest that, right? I mean, I'll give you an example, right? I was on the board of a thing called the Joinery in Stoneybatter, which was a gorgeous little gallery, experimental music space, in an old carpenter's workshop on Arbour Hill. And it was run by these amazing people, and they did an incredible job. And then after 7 years, they just had enough, couldn't make it pay, and they closed it down. And we were all terribly upset. And we'd lost the Joinery, and woe was us. But just a few months ago on Prussia Street, these guys have opened up this thing called Unit 44, which is this really cool experimental music venue. And they're holding loads of gigs. So there is an element of things die, but things are also born. And there's a certain amount of, like especially with creativity and creative spaces, as long as they're still opening up, it's okay if some of them are closing down. But having said that, so I just find the whole like, the doom mongering a bit oppressive. But at the same time, don't get me wrong, we are in a crisis. And the crisis for me is not necessarily the loss of creative spaces. It's the crisis is the disastrous level of rent and the precarity and uncertainty that faces people who are trying to afford rent in this town. It is totally unacceptable, the situation we found ourselves in, and it's very, very damaging to the place. So I think I've made a film that's very optimistic and positive about this city ultimately, because I think it is my favorite place in the world and I absolutely adore it. But I'm very lucky to have secure, affordable housing. And if you don't have secure, affordable housing, it's a very, very hard place to live, and that's wrong.
Yeah. It's inserting the class issues back in, that all the, all of that kind of investment in welfare and the city, you go the same way that the UK is now, where after creating a welfare state, after creating security and comfort for so many people, they just kind of stopped investing in it, so it dies and crumbles. And then now we're seeing the cost of that poverty, and how people are literally dying in the streets because the NHS has nothing. The NHS has absolutely nothing, and then it's going to become more and more tiered, and even their middle classes are nearly wiped out. And
England's in a much worse state than Ireland, and that's not something that has ever been true in the past. This is what's interesting about this moment in our history, is that now Ireland is a less dysfunctional place than England, a much less dysfunctional place. And in truth, it was a much more dysfunctional place for nearly all of its history. So the tables being turned is quite fascinating. And I think the base level of poverty in Dublin is not as low as it used to be at all. But there are huge issues around addiction, around mental health, and around housing, and a lot of them are connected. But England, I've just come back from London. England is in a very bad place, and I don't think it's going to get out of it anytime soon, Whereas ultimately, I think if you look back over the last 20, 30 years, Ireland has improved a lot as a place, in my view.
As long as we keep going in this direction. But I do think this film celebrates that so much. And you do get that sense of the past. You get that kind of bright sense of youth. You do get that encroaching sense of the even with the cobblestone being lost. But then how people really kind of rallied around it, I think it was inspiring, because we do treasure those spaces.
Amazing. No, I mean, the cobblestone, don't get me wrong, these spaces are really precious. And I think the cobblestone's one of those ones that just would be impossible to replace, partially because a lot of it's to do with the people who run it, the family who run it, and their personality, being so open and supportive to others. But yeah, the cobblestone, I think Darragh Lynch in the film really articulates perfectly, where he talks about how it just epitomizes all the unease about the way the city is being developed, the Airbnb flats, the hotels being built, the student accommodation that, I live in an area in Grangegorman, which is where we are now, actually. We've arrived in Grangegorman. I've just crossed the Lewis track, which means we have left Phibsborough and now we're in Grangegorman. And, there's some really big developments on the North Circular here that are behind gates. I'm just outside 274 North Circular, and there's a big gate with big angry red letters on it saying no parking and a horrible security camera. And I can't walk in there and walk down that street because I'm not a student in a student accommodation, even though they've built a gorgeous architectural street there. And I have a real problem with that, I think that's a really toxic thing to put into a community, a gated development. I'm absolutely against them.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm ranting here. Apologies.
No, but again, it's good to be taken on a little mini tour as well, because you get that perspective. But I mean, that's what I was sort of saying about the community. Before, you'd have kids growing up together and big packs of kids being friends and, getting jobs together. And you'd have, women staying at home, the men off working, but they'd all contribute. And if, maybe one family is left behind, people drop down food. And you get those stories from chhatting to people in the older generations. And you don't get that anymore. People are very isolated because everyone works.
Yeah, they can be. I mean, I don't know. It's funny. I lived in Stoneybatter before I lived in Grangeforman, and Stoneybatter would probably still be the village I go to. My office is in Stoneybatter. Danny's school, my son's school is in Grangeforman, and I have a lot of friends in Stoneybatter. So that's the kind of community I gravitate towards, and Phibsborough to an extent. And in Stoneybatter, I think the level of what our professor, the term I can't remember his name, I think it was Putnam, he talked about social capital and the
Yeah.
idea of a powerful community with a lot of bonds and linkages and groups and solidarity. I think there's loads of that in Stoneybatter. Absolutely loads. I think it's actually, for all that it's an expensive place to live now, it is a relatively successful model of development and gentrification in that there's a lot of communication and interest between the traditional Stoneybatter people and the new people who've come to live here. And a lot of that is to do with how Stoneybatter is physically laid out as well. Those little streets with the two up, two downs, they created a culture of street life, of street parties, of dropping into each other's houses, of sitting outside in chairs on a sunny day, and talking to one another. And funny enough, things like WhatsApp groups now on the street. Like you might have a street, and I run the WhatsApp group for my road. And that's a great little community binder as well. That's another kind of brick in the wall of a community. So I always just think, like, I think what my film was about, for a long time I thought my film was about just everything, and it wasn't focused on any one thing in particular. But I sent it to a friend of mine who said, he just got back to me and said, your film's about community, Luke.
Yeah,
And I was like, oh, I was like, I don't really like the word community. And he's like, well, I don't care. That's what it's about. And I think ultimately he's right.
yeah. And I love that the kind of rejuvenation with, like an influx of new faces and new nationalities, and does bring
Yeah.
more soul and more life to a community. Like, we're so lucky to be living in an era where we do get to experience that. And
Oh, definitely.
you
Like,
do get
I
that
agree.
flavor through it as well. Like, it's so lovely. But tell me um about curating the pace in the edit, about kind of capturing those moods and interweaving them with those like beautiful narrative stories.
Well, let me tell you, I mean, Elaine Gallagher, amazing producer, came on board the project kind of when exactly at the moment she needed to and got it over the line. All the DOPs have worked with Richard Kendrick, Paddy Jordan, Evan Barry, Jamie Goldrick, amazing people, the sound recorders, the mixers, the graders. But John Murphy, the editor, really is the sort of co-author of the film almost, or the person who was in it from the very start and who is still engaged with the film right now, in terms of helping getting it out there. And, he's there from the very, very start to the very, very end. And, he's a wonderfully talented fella. He's a mensch. It's a shame that he's a Manchester United fan, but I suppose
I was wondering
everyone
what
has
that
to
was.
have everyone has to have their fatal flaw, I suppose, and it's a relatively benign one, relatively. But no, he was really, really, really good on this film, and he's one of the best filmmakers in the country, in my view. Um, I think I mean, you've seen The Quiet Girl. He cut that as well. So, the job he did in my film was exquisite because it's not an easy film to cut that, and we did it in like 8 or 9 weeks, which is ridiculous.
Wow. And
Yeah, I
was that
know.
with post and stuff, or is that just to lock down the cuts and the back and forth? And were you in the room as well, or was this remote?
So we started remote. He's in Athenry now. He's got two small kids. So and it was kind of COVID as well. There was a lot of that still in the air for sure. Like, so started remote. Then I think he came up to Dublin. So I was lucky. So the film was funded by the Arts Council, as you know, but I got a little creative residency from Dublin City Council as well. So I got to be in D-Light Studios for 6 months,
Ooh,
which
lovely.
was,
Around the corner.
well, actually, not really, actually quite far away from where I live, but at the other end of the North Circular Road.
Yeah.
So it'd be like a 20-minute walk down there, 25-minute walk. But it meant I knew this end of the road very well, where I am now in Grangegorman. I'm just looking at the women's prison now and the clock tower rising up over the bend in the road. But D-Light was right by the Five Lamps behind where Kelly Harrington lives, a block up from where Gemma Dunleavy's from. And it was amazing to be embedded in that community for those 6 months. It was really crucial to the success of the thing. And so we set up a bit of an edit suite there. So that was the production office, but it was also the edit suite.
Wow. So that's like, I mean, it's so authentically of that location, really. Except for a
it's
few
funny
down in Athenry.
Yeah, I went out Athenry for a bit. Yeah, no, very much so. I think that helps the vibe. Like the grader, Dave Hughes, he lives on Monk Place, which is off the North Circular at one end in Phibsborough. So, I was always trying to get like Steve Power, who did a bit of the sound. He lives up in Cabra. I think Tony Cross used to live in Stony Batter. Like I was always reaching for the local, Alex Sapienza, who did a day in it. He's another Stony Batterer. If there was a choice, I'd get someone local because I felt that was the nature of the project,
Keeping it authentic. North side, yay.
Yeah.
But no,
it's sort of artisanal filmmaking.
Yeah.
Local
flavor, homegrown.
Yeah, exactly. Local produce. There's no Peruvian asparagus here. Like this is all born in Dublin 7 and Dublin 1,
And so what has the response been to the community watching it?
Well, I'm about to find that out, which is kind of fascinating because we had a few in for the premiere at Dublin Film Festival in March, and they were happy enough with it. But it's been to Cork, it's been to Louth, it's been to Galway, it's been to Sheffield, but we haven't played in Dublin since March. So yeah. So this weekend it'll probably be gone by the time this goes out. So this Thursday we're doing a special preview for the prisoners in Mountjoy Prison. So we're bringing an entire cinema in and putting it up inside the prison so that they can watch the film. And Lynch from Lancombe's going to play them a few tunes as well. So that's going to be a pretty special one. And then on Friday, I'm doing the Dublin 1 premiere where Gemma Dunleavy is the guest of honour. And we have people from that Dublin 1 community, members of Kelly Harrington's family and all her supporters, and just the Talking Bollocks podcast lads are hosting that. And, it's just a kind of, the Army Pipers are going to play everyone in, and it's going to be a really cool little sneak preview for that end of the road. And then on the opening night we have the Dublin 7 premiere, which is in the Lighthouse. So that's in collaboration with Bose, the football club Bohemians, and their foundation, their charity that they operate in the community. And we're doing one of the IFI, we're doing one in Belfast. So we're doing a lot of special events as well as having the standard release. That's kind of the model that we're going for.
So yeah, that's it. You'll be in the lion's den. So because like I love the kind of that kind of honesty when people don't like something. It's none of the film festival stuff. Like if someone is like a local and they're like, that was great, but I did not like that. Like they'd have that honesty as well. That
a few people have seen her from the area. They're like, oh, why didn't you do the la la la? That's the most interesting thing about the North Circular Road. And I'm like, it's interesting. There's a multitude in this area, and like everyone would make their own version of this film that would be different, and they would have the things that interest them in it. So it's kind of a, there's a North Circular Road for everyone, and this is my version of it. So that's what I'm going to expect as people going, why do you leave that out? Why did you do this? Why do you do that? But like, the response to the film has been so powerful. Like, people have been so kind about it and enthused by it and moved by it. And like, I just, it's definitely the best thing I've ever made, I think, in terms of it's the closest to what my heart wanted it to be. And it was a very hard project at times. It was very lonely. You have a very small budget. You have a very small team. There was months and months when it was just me working on it pretty much, and that's quite hard. So to see it out there and to see people enjoying it so much and getting so much from it is just amazing, really. It's great.
And it's absolutely gorgeous. Like, I mean, even the songs themselves, I think when they're set in that setting, you get the weight of the history behind it. Like, you get the songs, you listen to them in a way that's completely different than, like, I mean, you've most of them I'd have heard time and time again, but you get like, you kind of, it's, yeah, like I don't know, it just brings more meaning to them, and they're performed so beautifully and captured so gorgeously, and then interspersed with those, lovely stories. And
no, totally. Yeah, I kind of I had one day in the Cobblestone where I shot all those kind of session singers, and I did all the kind of John Flynn and Ona Canavan singing. And, I kind of got Richard Kendrick and Hugh Fox, who was just off Game of Thrones, I think, guys I can't normally afford. And I just said, will you do one day for me, please? Because I knew I wanted it to be pristine. And they loved it. They absolutely loved that shoot, because it was just a really generous, warm spirit. And that night where the people do the singing, it's called the night before Larry got stretched. And it's a famous singing night in the Cobblestone. And I think it was a real hub for the likes of Lancome and Ye Vagabonds and Skipper's Alley and Landless and Lisa O'Neill and all these people. They all kind of would have gone to it and kind of buzzed off each other at it. And I went down to it. It was the first one back after COVID. And I was feeling pretty down and pretty stressed. And, I'd only like 2 months left before I was meant to be delivering the film. And I was missing an awful lot of stuff, and I just wasn't, you go through the tunnel on a project like this, big time. And I was sitting there having my few pints, I was almost meditating, listening to all these people. And, I really tried to capture that kind of the nourishment you get from listening to those people, and the kind of almost meditative, restorative effect of being in a room like that, where you're under no pressure to chat or be charming or be in good form. You can just be and listen.
And after being starved of it for so long, like it's
right.
just one of those things where we didn't realize
right.
how much our soul needed that creativity until like it was just a void, and how difficult that was collectively for everybody. And I think
exactly, yeah. And I think the creativity in a context of togetherness, rather than that isolation that we all went through. And like that capitalism pushes you into constantly being self-absorbed and anxious and into your own bullshit the whole time. So when you go somewhere where you can be with others and lose that ego and that fretful mind, and that could be a singing session, it could be a football match at Daily Mount that's in the film. It could be, it could be a street protest. Like there's lots of moments it could be watching a boxing match on a big screen on Portland Row. It's. Or it could be playing a tin whistle outside your local shops and having banter with people who go past. Like these are the things that sustain us as humans,
Yeah. Oh my God, I could talk to you forever, but I must go. I really could. I could stay on another hour and just be like, and tell me about this thing. And that was such a wonderful bit. But I will let you go because it sounds like you're
sorry for banging on for ages. I'm home,
No, I loved it. No, I really
I'm walking up by the asylum wall now. It's this big granite wall that kind of towers over me, and it's like the reminder of what the mental hospital was like behind. It's kind of quite sort of intimidating, but I've just can see my front door now, and I haven't been home since Friday morning. So I've been in London and Cambridge, so I'm about to go into the arms of my family. So that's a pretty nice way to end this, I think.
That is a lovely way to end it, into the arms of your family, and then everybody hopefully can go see your beautiful film. So thank you so much for chatting with us.
I really loved that conversation, Gemma. Thank you very much.